Sunday night in Beacon Hill was so quiet I could hear the clock biting into wood. Olivia, my daughter-in-law, left her phone on the sapphire velvet sofa. A long buzz. The screen lit. The photo, Richard Hale. My husband, dead 7 years, 3 months, 16 days. Beneath it, the name, my love. The next message cut like a blade. Tomorrow 8 p.m. at the Mariner. Wear the black dress. Don't worry about your husband. What should have been mine will be ours. I swiped. Photos I'd never seen, Richard's smile with unfamiliar, colder eyes. Then a line that nailed my heart. Hard to believe she never knew Richard had a twin. Water stopped in the bathroom. Olivia stepped out. I put the phone back, smiled as if nothing had happened. Tomorrow night, at the Mariner. I'll turn every secret inside out. The Mariner's windows held back the harbor wind like glass lungs, trembling with the low roar of Friday night. I sat in the corner, where the candlelight couldn't quite reach, where a ficus cast leaves like slow-moving shadows across the tablecloth. 8 p.m. came and went on the polished brass clock behind the bar. At 8:05, the door opened, and the past walked in wearing my husband's face. Olivia floated beside him in a black dress that knifed through the room's warmth. He smiled the way Richard used to smile, except the warmth had been emptied out and replaced with calculation. My fingers tightened around the heavy stem of a Cabernet he always ordered. If I breathed too deeply, I'd drown. It should have been a scene near the end of a story. The reveal, the confrontation, the final turn of the key. But tonight was only the hinge. Because the part that mattered, the part that turned me from a grieving widow into someone who could do what needed doing, had begun 24 hours earlier in my kitchen on Beacon Hill, when I realized the quiet life I'd curated was a chessboard where I'd been playing checkers. I set down the sponge, wiped the sink dry until it shined like a blade, and pulled Timothy's old leather notebook from the drawer I hadn't opened in years. Richard had once called me steel wrapped in silk. I'd worn the silk too long. I flipped the notebook open, hands steady because they had to be, and started a list. First item, the phone. Olivia's phone, left on my velvet sofa like temptation. The thread was still burning in my mind. The messages signed my love, the photos I'd never seen, the line that carved the air out of my lungs. Hard to believe she never knew Richard had a twin. Somewhere between the words and the pictures, my grief hardened into clarity. A twin. Not a ghost and not a miracle. Biology and coincidence, and a man with my husband's eyes who wanted what Richard built. I rinsed the rag, folded it once, and told myself a single sentence out loud in the quiet house. You will not be the victim in your own story. Second item, the study. Richard's study had become a room I passed more than a room I entered. The leather chair still creaked with a phantom of his weight. The Mont Blanc pen still lay exactly where he'd left it. That room had been a sanctuary. I needed it to be a war room. I pulled the portrait from the wall, the one from our 30th anniversary where he looked like his truest self, and exposed the small safe behind it. I turned the dial without thinking, the way you turn an old prayer. 0417. 4 clicks. The door swung open. Papers, journals, a flat velvet box with the ring I'd taken from his hand before the cremation. I tucked the ring into my pocket and kept moving. Wills, titles, a yellowed envelope I'd never opened, thick with adoption records. I ran my thumb along the crease, felt the grit of years. Even before I slid it open, my bones understood. Not just a twin-shaped shadow dragging itself into our present, but a story buried under the floorboards of our marriage. I didn't read all of it then. I couldn't risk disappearing into memory when the clock was already chewing up the night. I photographed the documents I needed with my phone, set the rest back exactly as they'd been, replaced the portrait, smoothed the wall with my palm as if sealing a wound. Next item, eyes and ears. I called Eleanor because every woman needs one friend who always answers. No questions, I said, just help. She didn't ask for a why. She never does. Within 2 hours, thanks to her son-in-law's unfortunate hobby of home security, I had a handful of small cameras and 2 thumb-sized microphones that could listen through a door like the world's most patient ghosts. I tucked one into the seam of the living room bookcase, one under the lip of Richard's desk, one behind the crown molding that faced the foyer, and another inside the porcelain lamp that throws evening light across the study. I drew a map in Richard's notebook. corners, angles, coverage. I sat, tested the feed, watched my empty rooms appear on my tablet with the high, lonely clarity of a winter sky. Third item, the mariner. I called the maitre d', a man named Antoine, who had watched Richard hold court in that dining room for 20 years. I need Richard's table tomorrow, I said, and I need to see the entrance. He didn't ask why. People who've known grief recognize the sound of a spine going straight over the phone. Fourth item, proof I could show a cop if I had to, or a judge, or my son, Michael, somewhere over the Pacific chasing a promotion that kept him always almost home. I texted a name to Eleanor and asked for a discreet introduction. A private investigator who did not require a drama to be entertained. He called back by 9. I need to know who the man is who looks like my dead husband, I said. I need addresses. I need the shape of his days, and if there's a paper trail behind him, I need the thread. The man, Drake, didn't waste breath. I'll start tonight, he said, and I believed him because his voice had the cold patience of someone who has seen what people do when they're sure no one is watching. By midnight, the house felt like a stage before the curtain goes up. Set pieces ready, lights aimed, the space between what was and what would be humming like electricity. I walked the rooms, touching the edges of my life. The framed photos on the staircase, Michael with his first glove, a crooked front tooth, and the kind of joy money can't buy. Richard and me on a Cape Cod dune, hair blown wild, his arm around me, like he'd invented the idea. In the living room, the sapphire sofa where the phone had sat, it screened briefly a knife. In the kitchen, the mug I always called his, stupid and precious and suddenly heavy with meaning. I washed it, dried it, set it on the top shelf. You honor the past by keeping what matters and weaponizing the rest. Sleep tried to pull me under, and I didn't let it. Instead, I wrote a letter to Michael. Not to send, but to say the things a mother should not have to say over a shaky video call at some awful hour. I told him I was safe. I told him I was strong. I told him the story wasn't finished, and neither was I. At 3 a.m., I stood at the study window and watched Beacon Hill exhale. A cab kissed the corner and slid away. Somewhere a dog barked once like a punctuation mark. I pressed my palm to the glass and gave myself permission to be angry. Not the kind that makes you reckless. The kind that makes you precise. Morning came like a verdict. The city put on its weekday face, I put on mine. People think armor looks like metal. Mine looked like a navy dress. Richard loved and a pair of low heels that could run if they needed to. I hid a recorder inside the locket he'd given me on our 40th, an unholy baptism for something meant to hold a lock of hair. I set tea for 1 in the living room, I expected would soon be for 2, and at 11 a.m., as if on cue, Olivia texted, "Could I stop by to borrow that garden book?" Polite. Practiced. Like the version of herself she serves to the world. I typed back what a woman like me is expected to type. "Of course, dear. I'll put on a kettle." When she arrived, I felt the camera peering from the molding like a guardian angel with a wire. Olivia's beauty has always been engineered. Nothing wrong with engineering. But today, there was a brightness to her eyes like a pilot light cranked too high. She hugged me with the choreography of family, air-kissed, slid onto the sofa where the phone had lit up. I wore my grandmother's cardigan and the softness of a woman who bakes for neighbors. Let her believe I was made of lace and sentiment. "How's Michael?" I asked, pouring tea. "Hong Kong? Singapore, then maybe Dubai," she said, then placed her phone on the cushion exactly where it had been, as if it were a stage direction. The living room camera caught her hands when I stepped into the kitchen. The way her fingers drifted across the armchair to Richard's study key, the way she replaced it a half-inch left of where it had lived for years. People who lie find it hard to stop doing small, unnecessary things. It's the bleed. "Here's your garden book," I said lightly, returning with lemon cookies. Olivia smiled and said all the right sentences. "You know," she added as she rose to leave, "you should really think about selling the Cape House. It's a lot to manage, and memories can be so heavy." She let the word unfurl between us like a scarf. I let it hang. "Some memories," I said, "are a kind of spine." She studied me, the way you study a door you're not sure is locked, then melted back into her role. Kissed my cheek, promised Sunday. Left a trace of expensive perfume and something colder. When the door clicked shut, I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath since the first text. I checked the feeds. The camera had caught exactly what I'd hoped. The look she gave the portrait in the study, calculating softness, before she lifted it a fraction of an inch to weigh the hidden safe behind it. Noted. Time saved. By late afternoon, Drake called. Found him, he said. No romance in it. A hotel near the harbor, under a name that wasn't quite his. He read me a history, the kind you hope never attaches to the person you love. Complaints, charges that didn't stick, schemes heavy with coincidence and cruelty. The pattern formed like frost on a window. Men who look like other men, women drawn toward a mouth that says what they need, a hand on a shoulder that feels like recognition. Will you meet him? Drake asked. I already have, I said, watching the Mariner's reservation confirm in my email like an omen. Tomorrow at 8. And now it is tomorrow, and it is 8. And he is here in a charcoal suit that fits the memory of a man I buried. Olivia leans into him the way a woman leans into a solution she knows is wrong but craves anyway. Antoine catches my eye across the room with that grave civility only certain men possess, the kind that says, I will look when you need me to look, and I will not when you don't. My glass is 3/4 full, and my heart is something else, full of fury, yes, but also of a strange mercy for the life that brought us here. The harbor beyond the windows flashes a knife-silver ripple. I adjust the locket at my throat. Somewhere in my pocket, Richard's ring presses against my palm, a small circle of gold with a gravity greater than any planet. He scans the room. I see the moment he sees me. His face reorganizes itself into charm with the quickness of a card trick. Olivia startles like a deer. I lift my glass a fraction, an invitation and a summons. If this were a movie, the score would dip and the camera would push in. But this is not a movie. This is my life. He takes a step. I let a smile touch my mouth, just enough silk to hide the steel. The night holds its breath. And I think with a clarity that feels like faith, you walked in wearing his face, but you are about to learn mine. He didn't look at me right away. He entered like a hunter who knows the woods, counting steps, testing the wind, before lifting his eyes and letting Richard's decade-old smile slowly settle onto a stranger's face. Olivia saw me first. Her heel caught half a beat. The hand hooked in his sleeve loosened. In the quick pane of glass reflecting the harbor lights, I understood. What frightened her wasn't me, but a version of herself, unblinking and unafraid, rising to the surface. I tipped my glass just enough for the ice to kiss the crystal, a thin bell of sound like steel. Antoine read it, drifted to the table across from me, and with a barely visible nod invited our regulars to join me. The room at the Mariner tightened by a stitch. Porcelain hushed, spoons paused mid-espresso, laughter softened and drew back like a tide. He pulled out a chair for Olivia, then took the seat opposite me, the exact spot Richard always chose to keep the ceiling light out of my eyes on our anniversaries. He chose it as if memory were a decoration you could place precisely. Mrs. Morgan. He used Richard's lower register, the same measured beat he saved for soothing anxious clients. What a surprise. I don't like surprises anymore, I said, keeping my voice flat as water before the wind shifts. Tonight we speak plainly. Olivia set down her purse. Her fingers still trembled, but her eyes had returned to that trained politeness, wet, bright, rehearsed apologies loaded and ready. I turned the pendant at my throat, the 40-year anniversary gift, and heard a tiny click in my head. The recorder had marked the moment. My name is Lawrence, he said, smiling. Richard's twin. Older twin? I raised an eyebrow. I have papers that say otherwise, but I'm not here to argue birth certificates. I'm here about what you and Olivia are doing to my family. Olivia swallowed. Lawrence needed half a second to switch roles, from lost relative to gentleman empath. You're grieving. I'm sorry Richard passed so young. Richard has been gone 7 years, I cut in, quiet but sharp. And you forfeited your right to perform here when you walked into the Mariner in a suit copied from the ones hanging in our closet. Lawrence, or whatever name fits tonight, use your own voice. Tell me the plan. I slid a thin envelope onto the table. Inside, 3 soft grain prints. Olivia and Lawrence in a hotel lobby facing the harbor, Olivia touching the frame in my study, a close shot of a man's hands riffling files at the cape, no ring on the finger, only a fresh pale groove. He glanced, half smiled. Nice pictures, but you've got nothing but imagination. Imagination doesn't timestamp, I said, angling the candlelight to catch the tiny channel etched along the pendant's rim. Devices do. Try that sentence again, slower, so the device can hear you clearly. A thin chill, a knife's edge slid through his gaze. Only a heartbeat. Then he leaned back, fingers steepled, performing ease. What do you want? A number to buy your silence? Or shall I simply vanish from Boston? Two things, I said. First, stop, immediately. No more reaching for offshore accounts or any file carrying Richard's name. Second, Olivia calls Michael tonight, tells the truth, word for word, before I do. She owes Michael nothing, he said, teeth clicking on my son's name like he'd bitten grit. You, on the other hand, owe me the family I never had. You don't want a family, I said, holding the face that held Richard's eyes but not his light. You want a shortcut. He cocked his head, calculations shuffling behind his forehead. Shortcuts are how smart men, even in unfair field, don't preach hard work to me. I've stood at the window long enough. While he talked, I saw Antoine at the edge of my vision set down another bottle. Ordinary theater for a good dining room. But I knew the cue. 2 people entered, just another couple on a weekend night, and sat at the table near the door. They would never look our way, until they had to. I hadn't brought the police to make a scene. I'd brought them because smart women don't walk alone into a hunter's favorite clearing. I used to think Richard was a straight-line man, Lawrence said, pouring himself a glass and filling Olivia's with the intimacy of practice. Now I see he knew how to curve, like you. Admirable. We call it staying alive, I said. You call it crooked because you only know shortcuts. The difference is simple. We don't take what isn't ours. Olivia set the glass down, hands pressed together like prayer. Suzanne, she stopped, searching for words in a room full of other people's dinners. If I could speak with you alone? No, I said, still watching Lawrence. You arrived together. You listened together. He smiled, the husk in his voice showing. You think you're in control. Truth is, a single article about inconsistencies in your old paperwork and the banks freeze everything. 72 hours is plenty for me to take what I need. And if you fancy the police, they'll love the story of a paranoid widow bugging her daughter-in-law. I sipped, letting Oak cut the harbor's cold salt drifting in. I don't need an article, I said. I need evidence, and you've already said too much. I tilted my head, held his eyes. One more thing. Harborview Hotel, room 712, registered as Lawrence Mitchell, cash at the desk. 3 calls to Preston and Walsh this week. Phone records say so, unless you've learned a new miracle. This time Olivia truly staggered. Oh God, Lawrence. He turned to her, soothing. They're bluffing. Don't. I laid a second envelope on the table. Inside were copies of Richard's neat hand in his leather book. Dates, times, met the man who looks like me, and a single plain line, hard, final. Use caution. I hadn't read it through last night, afraid it would soften me. I was done softening. Richard met you, I said, and you convinced him some things should be kept quiet to protect his family. I understand why he did it. Your mistake was thinking I would protect them by staying quiet. He leaned back fully, lips pressed. The restaurant's sound swelled again, the sea coming back after a drawn breath. At the door, the couple stood in unison. Antoine glided over, calm as a man offering more bread. The scene was ready to move. All right, Lawrence said, voice lower now, a strip of raw metal showing. How do you want this to end? You stand, I said. You leave with those 2, politely, like a gentleman who went to a good school. Olivia calls Michael before she goes home and says every word out loud. I will send what I have to my attorney, and if there's any intelligence left in you, you'll recognize this as the cheapest exit you'll ever get. He laughed, without mirth. You think I'm afraid of lawyers? I think you're afraid of the only thing you can't control. Time. I let the words fall like a formula I'd memorized. Time stamped you on my cameras, on your key card, on every call you placed. You can bend words. You can't bend hours. No one spoke for a few beats. A boat moaned somewhere up the harbor. Rope hissed over iron cleats, the sound of home once. Tonight it sounded like nails being set. Lawrence put down his glass. Decision made. Fine, he said, but if you think the story ends here, you don't understand men like me. I do, I said, rising. That's why I never walk alone. The couple by the door, no longer a couple, approached. They spoke softly, politely, like asking to change tables because of glare. Lawrence raised his hands. A last smile flashed across Richard's features like a cheap trick. He went anyway. Olivia stood, turned toward me, mouth trembling, eyes filling the old way that had saved her more than once. Not tonight. Call Michael, I said, light but closing every exit. Now. She nodded, a child answering to her given name. Then they moved through the foyer and out the revolving door, leaving a cool scene behind them. Antoine set a hand on the back of my chair, discreet. Madam? Is the bisque still on? My voice felt tired, like I'd been rowing into wind. I think I need something warm. Of course, he said, and dipped his head the way a man bows after a curtain falls. I didn't go home at once. I sat at Richard's observation post, the table with a clean view of the harbor and the entrance, and let my body understand what my head had done. Fog began sliding off the water like a parade of gray cats. North somewhere, a deep horn pulled a note across my spine. I slipped a hand into my coat pocket and closed around Richard's wedding band, round, heavy, a vow proven by fire. My phone buzzed. Drake. He's leaving Harborview. Small suitcase. Don't worry. Eyes on. I typed back. Olivia will call Michael. If she doesn't, I will. Outside, the wind washed candle and beef from my clothes, left plain salt. I walked the hill toward Beacon Hill. Heels ticked the old bluestone, each step a punctuation mark. Boston at night always reminds you, history isn't only in books. It lurks at corners, crouches on church steps, breathes through wooden sash. Inside, I kept the hall lamp low for the cameras. I hung my coat and went straight to the study. The frame was straight, no new scratches. I opened the tablet and replayed the living room feed as we left. Olivia had scanned the room like a woman searching for her own face in a crowd. No confidence, no practiced charm, just a young woman finally understanding how far she'd walked in the dark. I saved that clip, not for revenge. To remind myself every opponent starts as a person with a breakable hour. The phone rang. Michael. Video from Singapore, office glass behind him, city lights. Mom? His voice was rough. Olivia called. She said things. I'm booking a flight. I'm coming home. Slow down, I said, forcing softness from a place gone hard. Come, but don't run. You're exhausted. Why would she? And that man? She said. He looks like Dad, he swallowed. Did you know? I'll tell you tonight, I said. But first, sleep a few hours. Nothing falls apart in one night. Fly home, we'll handle it together. Listen to me. 2 beats of silence. He nodded. You're stronger than I thought. No, I said. I just remembered how to stand upright. When the screen went dark, the house held the quiet of a small chapel. I opened the drawer and laid Richard's ring back in its velvet. Beside it sat his leather notebook. I turned to the last page in his hand. Some truths only serve to worry the ones we love. I touched my pen to that line and added my own. Until silence becomes the whole, the bad thing crawls through. I capped the pen, closed the book, leaned back. Outside, fog had climbed the steps like a cat that had claimed the house. Inside, something in me clicked into place, not peace, but order. The pieces were set. The first moves taken. The middle of my story, the battle chapter, closed on a dinner under candles, a quiet command whispered through a pendant, and a confession forced to speak its proper name. Morning would give the papers a slice, the lawyers the rest, and the police what belonged to them. Morning would put Michael on a plane, and Boston would smell again like toast, coffee, and sea. I would brew tea, as always, and set it on the desk, once Richard's, now mine, as a passing of the torch that needs no deed. Before the night sealed, I walked to the staircase and the wall of frames. I stopped at the Cape Dune photo. Richard holding me, our hair blown against the wind, the ocean behind us impossibly blue. I whispered into a pocket of stone. I kept the house. Then I turned off all but one hall light, just enough for the cameras to see, for me to walk, for memory to find its way home without losing the present. Boston swallowed the last tap of my shoes, and the house, for the first time in years, felt like a body coming down from a fever. Spent, flushed, but steady. I eased the study door shut, so softly only the recorder would hear. And at last, the dark agreed to fall. Morning found Boston rinsed clean, salt on the air, the kind of gray that makes brass door plates look like promises. I brewed coffee I didn't need and set 2 cups on Richard's desk. One where his used to sit, one where mine belonged now. At 9:12 the gate camera pinged, and there was Michael in yesterday's suit. Tie crooked, eyes too bright from sleep he didn't get. I opened the door before he reached the bell. He hugged me like a man who had been holding his breath over an ocean and finally touched ground. We didn't start with questions. We started with toast. He ate because I put a plate in front of him, the same way he had at 10 when a little league loss hollowed him out. When he could finally meet my eyes, they were glassy but steady. "She told me," he said. "Some of it. Not the parts that matter." He meant the parts where shame grows teeth. I took him to the study. The cameras saw us enter, then ignored us like good furniture. I showed him what I could show: Richard's last page in the leather book, the copies I'd pulled of Olivia and Lawrence together, a short clip with sound stripped where Lawrence's voice uncoiled like wire. Michael watched without speaking, the way his father used to when truth walked into a room and tried to leave unannounced. When it ended, he leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands steepled, jaw tight. "I kept thinking I could fix our distance by working harder," he said. "It turns out I was building a bridge to nowhere." "You were building a bridge," I said. "Someone else chose to burn it behind you." He nodded once, grateful and unconvinced. "What happens now?" "Now we stop bleeding," I said. "Police have him. My attorney has the files. Your company's counsel is briefed enough to keep the books locked where they should be." I let a breath go I hadn't noticed holding. "And Olivia, she will speak to the detective again today. Her choices are her own. Yours can be cleaner." He looked at the portrait over the mantel. Richard in mid-laugh on the cape, salt stiffening his hair, a man who believed storms made their own lessons. "I hate that he has Dad's face," Michael said. "I hate that when I close my eyes that's the face I see beside." He stopped. I put my hand over his, and for a while we let the house do the talking. The tick of the regulator clock, a gull tearing the morning like paper, the old pipes negotiating with hot water. At 10:03, Drake texted, "Harborview checkout complete. Reeves attempted to dump a phone in a storm drain. Recovered. Forensics en route. Meet 14? I showed Michael. "We're not spectators," I said. "If there's a door to lock, we lock it ourselves." We spent the late morning doing small, serious things. I moved family jewelry from the wall safe to a bank box, while Michael called the firm's CFO and put verbal guardrails around any account with Richard's name in its DNA. You could feel the machine of our life respond, first a lurch, then a hum, as people who loved us quietly closed ranks. The gardener texted to say the back gate latch was sticking. I told him I liked the inconvenience for now. At noon, Olivia called. I put her on speaker because secrets grow best in dark corners. Her voice was small and over-enunciated, as if each word had to pass through a narrow opening. "I'm at the precinct," she said. "I'm cooperating. They said a plea is possible." Michael's face was a study in weather. First wind, then rain, then the flat calm that sailors trust least. "Tell the truth," he said. "All of it. Don't curate the parts that make you sound noble." A beat. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "That's not the same as repair," he answered, and ended the call gently, like placing a glass on marble. We met Drake at 2 in a side office above a locksmith on Charles Street, his choice for reasons I admired. He spread photos with the efficiency of a surgeon. Guest logs, ATM pulls, a ledger and a neat alien hand that turned our lives into columns. He planned a 3-prong hit, Drake said. Asset freezes through nuisance filings, document laundering through a retired hired examiner in Arizona, and a public narrative to pressure settlement. "You cut the first leg off last night." He tapped the pendant I'd worn again, today out of gratitude rather than strategy. "We'll deliver the second. The third dies when it meets sunlight." Michael asked the right questions, the hard ones, the ones that keep men honest. Drake answered, unruffled, a man who respects grown-ups. When we finished, he slid one last print across the table. Lawrence at a payphone, who still uses a payphone, smiling at nothing. Men like this always mistake momentum for inevitability. Drake said, "They forget one stubborn human can turn a wheel." We walked home slow, the way you do when your body remembers adrenaline and would like a word. At the corner, a boy on a scooter laughed so hard he almost fell, and his mother's hand shot out of the air like grace. I thought about choices, about the tiny pivots that save whole lives. At our gate, Michael stopped. "You didn't wait for a rescue," he said. "You built one." "No," I said, opening the latch that now stuck the way I preferred. I remembered the exits Richard marked for us, and I used the door he would have used. We went inside, and for the first time in months, the house felt perfectly level under our feet. That night, I set the table as if I were expecting company. Because I was. Not for dinner, but for the sort of conversation only happens when the mask gets heavy and people forget their lines. I polished Richard's old cufflinks and put them in my pocket like talismans. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and rain. In the study, my tablet displayed a quiet grid of camera feeds: foyer, living room, hallway outside the safe, the small brass lamp with a pinhole eye trained on the portrait where the wall swings open. Insurance, not theater. I wasn't hunting drama. I was building proof. At 6:40, Detective Morelli called from his unmarked sedan down the block. He had the kind of voice that's been taught to land softly, firm without bruising. "We're in position," he said. "Your private investigator will relay anything new from the harbor view. If the target deviates, we pivot. You're sure about being visible?" I looked up at Richard's portrait. He was laughing toward the horizon, as if there were some private joke between him and the sea. "I've spent 7 years disappearing politely," I said. "I'm ready to be seen." The plan was simple in the way bridges are simple. All strength distributed across repetition and steel. Lawrence wanted to escalate from whispers to signatures. He liked the stage at Le Main, the old French dining room overlooking the harbor, all mirrored panels and sailcloth light. He and Olivia met there Thursday nights like clockwork. We would let the clock ring and meet them in their favorite chime. But first, the harbor view. Drake texted at 7:05, room 712 active. Courier arrived 1859 with flat envelope, Reeves tipped heavily. Then, 2 minutes later, a grainy still, Lawrence in profile at the desk, reading under a weak lampshade glow. The envelope cracked open like a gull's egg. My breath did the odd seesaw it does when terror and relief trade places. Morelli's reply arrived a heartbeat after. "Warrant team ready, on your go." I wanted that go to be a door he opened himself. People like Lawrence always believe they are driving. Give them a road, and they'll speed toward their own cliff with both hands on the wheel and a grin. So I put on Richard's favorite dress, midnight blue, quiet and deliberate, and I walked out into the evening like someone returning to a city that had been waiting for her. Le Main was the same as always. Silver that remembered being touched, waiters who could read a room like scripture, the harbor darkening into velvet beyond the glass. Antoine recognized me and said nothing, which is a language of its own. He led me to the table Richard loved, just inside the sight line where arrivals cross the threshold. He poured 1 glass of Cabernet and placed a second, empty, across from me. I didn't correct him. A table is a kind of promise, and promises have power. At 8:03, Olivia entered first, a black dress cut to sound expensive without raising its voice, hair tucked behind one ear the way she did when she needed permission. She spotted me, faltered, recovered. Then Lawrence stepped in from the night, Richard's face like a costume that fit too well in all the wrong places. He had the posture right, the cadence of the stride, even the half-smile Richard saved for rooms he already owned. But the eyes, God help me, the eyes were winter, where Richard's had always been a working autumn, honest with weather. Lawrence followed Olivia's gaze and saw me. There is a moment in any performance when a new act forces the lights to change. You could feel it run through the restaurant like a ripple touching everything. Forks suspended, conversations thinning, the piano player shifting to a song with bones in it. I raised my glass in greeting the way I would to an old family friend. "Good evening," I said, and my voice didn't shake. "It's time we stopped borrowing each other's names." Olivia moved first, gliding toward the exit as if she might evaporate. Lawrence caught her wrist with 2 fingers, gentle enough to look like chivalry, strong enough to be ownership, and steered her instead to my table. "Mrs. Hale," he said smoothly, as if we'd run into each other in line at a charity gala. "What a surprise." "Not really," I said. "You like this room, you've been rehearsing here." I glanced toward Antoine. He was already at the far wall, quietly ushering a pair of plainclothes officers through the service door. The world does you small kindnesses when you treat it well long enough. We sat. The second glass stayed empty. Lawrence placed his hands on the linen in a posture of calm. "You've been misled," he began. Olivia has been unwell. I've been practicing sympathy, I said. Or forgery? I set a slim folder on the table and removed 3 pages. The security still of Olivia photographing my safe. A transcript of Lawrence's phone call with the retired examiner in Arizona, his voice syruped with false respect. A ledger page listing account numbers and 2 words in a neat alien hand, Phase 2. I didn't push them toward him. I just let them breathe. He didn't look. He watched me with that winter in his eyes and tried a different door. I am your late husband's brother, he said gently. What we are talking about is family. Family pays its bills, I said. Family doesn't break into its dead's house and use the living like tools. I turned to Olivia. You can leave this table with your dignity. You can tell the truth now and keep a portion of yourself intact, the portion that knows right from wrong. Or you can let him finish writing your story and discover how it ends. Her mouth opened, then closed. You could see the gears of hope, small, stubborn things trying to catch. I never meant, she started, and had to swallow the sentence like a pill. He said it was already his, that your money came from work, I said. From good decisions and bad ones we learned from mornings like this city has, gray and salted and honest. He told you a fairy tale that needed a villain in a vault. It flattered your hunger. All theft stories flatter someone's hunger. Lawrence's smile thinned, then left. If you're going to lecture, do it at home, he said. You're making a scene. Correct, I said. I am an old woman in a pretty dress making a scene in a room that remembers my husband's laugh. I am also, at this exact moment, an affidavit walking. And downstairs in a hotel with a view you didn't earn, there's a room full of paper that forgot who owns it. He blinked, the smallest crack, but there. He reached for his napkin as if to buy himself a second, and in that half-beat, Detective Morelli appeared at the edge of the mirror, reflected first, as if the room wanted to give us a warning. Then he was at the table with a partner and a hand that's practiced at being steady. Mr. Reeves, he said, low. I'm going to ask you to stand up. The next 30 seconds were made of cotton and glass. Olivia's breath quickened into a sound like a torn dress. Lawrence looked me in the eye and let the winter show its teeth. You have no idea what door you just opened, he murmured. You think you've won, but you're old. Old people forget things. Stairs, gas, names. He pitched his voice just loud enough that my pendant, wired like hope, could drink every word. Mr. Reeves, Morelli repeated, and he rose. Olivia's chair scraped. For a moment she teetered between him and the officers like a figure in a children's book deciding which forest to enter. Then something in her posture gave way. The exact angle by which shame becomes decision, and she stepped toward Morelli. I'll cooperate, she said. It came out small but true. I'll tell you everything. They left quietly as if the room had rehearsed its part. Conversation returned not all at once, but in threads. The piano player landed on the end of someone to watch over me, with more heart than irony. Antoine refilled my glass without looking at me long enough to make it hurt. I lifted it to Richard's empty chair and put it down untouched. Outside, the air was the wet kind that refuses theatrics. Cars hissed on the slick street. Down the block, a news van idled with its lights off like an animal waiting for a cue. Morelli caught up with me before I reached the corner. Search team's in, he said. We'll find the doctor's fabrications and the drafts for the probate stunt. Your recordings help. He hesitated. You okay? I'm steady, I said, and discovered it was true in the way you sometimes discover you've been singing along without realizing it. My son? At your house, he said. Your neighbor let him in when the reporters started sniffing. He said he'd put on coffee. We walked a block together without using it up with words. He stopped under a street lamp that hummed like a tired chorus. You know this isn't the end, he said softly. It's the turn. There's press, there's plea, there's the long, boring business of truth. Truth is my favorite kind of boring, I said. It stays put when you need it. He almost smiled, tipped his hat in a way men forgot sometime around 1978, and headed back into a night that had work left in it. At home, the house felt like a ship making port after a storm. Everything in its place and changed anyway. Michael had 2 mugs waiting and the look of someone who was finally choosing to join his life rather than outrun it. You did it, he said simply. I shook my head. No. We did the next right thing, and the next. It's a chain, not a sword. We watched the feeds together while the night softened. The foyer camera showed nothing more dangerous than a neighbor's cat auditioning for ownership of our step. In the study, the portrait lamp drew a perfect circle of light around Richard's laughing face. Michael stared up at him a long time. "He'd be proud," he said. "Of the plan, yes, but mostly that you never mistook revenge for repair." "Revenge is bad at carpentry," I said. "It can't build anything square." I pulled open the desk drawer and took out the small velvet box with Richard's wedding band. The gold was warm from the wood as if it had been thinking. I set it on the blotter, next to Drake's latest list of what we'd secured and what still needed doing. Letters to counsel, asset locks made permanent, a simple statement to the press that acknowledged grief and refused spectacle. We made the statement that night. 4 sentences, none of them exciting, all of them true. By morning it was on the front page, small and stubborn between larger fonts. Something in me unclenched. I went out to the garden in my robe and watered the rosemary, pinched back the tomatoes like an ordinary woman with ordinary chores. Across the hedge, Mrs. O'Malley waved with her trowel, and when she mouthed "saw the news," I mouthed back, "We're fine." And for the first time since my living room glowed with a dead man's text, the words felt earned. At 10, Drake arrived with a folder that looked heavier than it weighed. "Harborview yielded what we needed," he said. And then some. Draft petitions, doctored charts, the outline of a media strategy built on a ghost. The Examiner in Arizona has already flipped. He's eager to talk about how he got seduced into bending facts he should have left alone. It's a tidy arc if the court likes tidy arcs. "The court likes receipts," I said. "We have them." He nodded, then glanced at the portrait. "He built a good company," Drake said. "But more than that, he built a good room for you to fight in. A strange comfort, and exactly the right one." When Drake left, Michael stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, a little boy and a decent man sharing the same body. "What now?" he asked. "Now we clean," I said. "We mop up the messes that have names, and then we go looking for the ones that don't. We fix the latch on the gate. We change the safe combination to something only you and I would think of. We call the board and let them hear our Kong. We tell the truth at a pace that starves rumor. We visit the Cape and air every room. We let time do the part it's actually good at." He exhaled, relief and sorrow traveling together like siblings who finally called a truce. "And Olivia?" he asked, softer. "She chose her road," I said. "Now she can choose how much of herself she wants to reclaim on it." I touched his shoulder. "You don't have to carry her bag the whole way." He nodded. We stood there long enough to feel the house notice us. Then he picked up a screwdriver for the gate, and I gathered the documents for my attorney. And somewhere in the middle of those ordinary motions, the future, our future, came back into view. Not as a finish line or a headline, but as a hallway with doors we could open, one at a time. Dawn broke the way Boston likes to do everything, gray first, then honest. By 9, the courthouse steps were a spill of umbrellas and microphones, a bright reef the tide of news had grown overnight. Michael squeezed my hand before we climbed out of the car. "One door at a time," he said, repeating the mantra we'd invented when grief was new and the mailbox still brought condolence cards. We walked past the cameras without blinking. Truth doesn't need to pose. Inside, arraignment was fluorescent and procedural. Lawrence stood in a wrinkled suit that wasn't his, jaw set, winter in his eyes now wind-chapped and mean. He scanned the gallery for me like a hunter ticking off distances, then found nothing he could use. Olivia kept her gaze glued to the table. When the judge asked for a plea, her voice trembled but didn't break. "Guilty. With cooperation." The 2 words landed like furniture being moved upstairs. Inelegant, necessary. Lawrence pled not guilty and added a smirk, the last coin in a bankrupt wallet. When it ended, the corridor filled with voices shaped like questions. Morelli ghosted to our side. "Room 712 gave us everything," he murmured. "Doctors already talking. Your recordings seal it. We'll keep you out of the spotlight where we can, but some daylight is good. Daylight kills fungus." He gave my shoulder a careful pat and drifted away, trailing his quiet competence like a coat. We didn't go home. We went to the Cape. The old house breathed us in the way only a place built by love can. floorboards greeting shoes they remembered, salt in the air that still knew our names. I opened every window and let the Atlantic do what it does best, tell the truth in a language made of weather. In the bedroom, the painting of the harbor came down. The safe swung open, and what remained inside waited with the patience of paper. I wasn't searching for treasure. I was searching for the splinter, small, easy to miss, responsible for the ache. A leather folio hid behind the blue velvet jewelry box I'd handled 100 times without really touching. Inside, a letter in Richard's hand addressed to me, dated 1 week before his heart forgot its job. Susie, if this reaches you, it means I ran out of courage or clocks. I met him. He wears my face and none of my years. He wants what we built because he believes it was owed to him at birth. I told our council to watch the shadows and keep you out of them. If I didn't get to say this, you are the whole point. If he ever comes for you and Michael, let him underestimate you. It's quicker. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the letter be both knife and stitch. Michael read it over my shoulder with the kind of silence that pairs with awe. He knew, he said, and he trusted you to finish what he couldn't. I put the letter back in its envelope, and beside it, left a note of my own in a hand the house would recognize. We spent the afternoon doing what the living do after storms, repairing small things that were never really the problem and always part of the answer. Michael fixed the gate latch. I tightened the loose brass on the banister that had snagged sweaters for years. We labeled boxes that had been miscellaneous since 1998, and, for the first time, weren't. Near sundown, Drake arrived in boat shoes and his city coat, smiling the way men do who prefer results to congratulations. 2 updates, he said, stepping into the kitchen where the kettle's soft rumble counted time. 1. Your daughter-in-law sat with the DA for 3 hours. She corroborated the forged medical narrative, the planned multi-jurisdictional filings, the account access scripts. 2. We've mapped every vulnerable instrument Richard set up during the 90s expansion and hardened them. The Caymans are now dull as toast. Michael exhaled, a sound like a tire finding pavement. And the story he built about where our money came from. Drake's eyes flicked to me, then softened. Dead on arrival, he said. We chased every thread. The only inheritance in this family is grit. We walked the beach after he left, the sky turning that violet that makes you think of hymns even if you forgot the words. I want to see her, Michael said suddenly. Not to forgive. Not yet. To say my piece while I still recognize my own voice. I looped my arm through his. Then we will. Not today, but soon. We'll choose the room, we'll choose the light, and we'll bring our dignity with us like armor. The call came the next morning. Press wanting quotes, the board wanting reassurance, the bank wanting to confirm the new authorizations. We answered the way we promised we would. Calm first, clear next. Our company is steady. Our family is steady. We trust the process and the truth. Short sentences, well-built doors. That afternoon, I stood in the garden with shears and an old apron and cut back what had grown wild on purpose while we were busy surviving. The rosemary had gone leggy. The roses had the good kind of thorns. Across the hedge, Mrs. O'Malley called, "You need anything, Sue?" "Just time," I said, not raising my voice. "And a little rain at night." A week later, we kept Michael's appointment at the detention center. The room was cubicles and glass and phones, with the accumulated grief of 1,000 conversations baked into the plastic. When Olivia sat down across from us, she looked 10 years older, and for the first time, exactly her age. She picked up the receiver with hands that had learned about consequence. "I won't ask you to forgive me," she said before the awkwards could bloom. "I won't even ask you to understand. I made choices because they were easier in the moment and like the story where I was owed something. He knew how to read that want." Her eyes flicked to me and then to Michael. "I will tell the truth. And when I'm done telling it to the court, I'll tell it to myself until it sticks." Michael nodded. "There were a lot of rooms I should have been in," he said. "I wasn't. That's on me. What you did is on you. We'll both serve our sentences, just different kinds." She closed her eyes in a gratitude too messy to be romantic. "Thank you for not making this uglier," she whispered. "It already is what it is." I pressed my palm to the glass, not to bless or absolve, just to mark the moment as real. "Build something true on the other side," I said. There's more room for it than you think. We left with the peculiar lightness that comes from carrying your own name out of a hard building. On the sidewalk, Michael put an arm around my shoulders the way men do when they've decided to stay. Dad used to say business is chess, he murmured. I think life is carpentry. Measure twice, cut once, sand like you mean it. Seal it against weather, I added. We smiled at the same nothing and the same everything. That night, back in the city, I slid Richard's ring onto its little velvet raft, closed the drawer, and turned the key with a finality that felt like beginning rather than end. On the mantel, between the photographs of graduations and cookouts and one terrible haircut we'd never replaced, I set a new frame. Just paper behind glass, Drake's neat list of completed protections, checked boxes like small prayers answered. I poured 2 small glasses of Cabernet, one for the memory and one for the room, and opened the window to let in a sliver of the harbor's breath. Checkmate, I'd said a week ago, and maybe it was. But standing there, listening to the city remember itself, I realized I preferred another word, level. The way a bubble floats to center when the surface is finally true. Tomorrow there would be more letters, more meetings, a garden that needed mulch, and a company that needed a voice at the table that didn't mistake noise for leadership. Tomorrow, there would be ordinary. And after everything, ordinary felt like the bravest thing I could choose. By the time spring remembered how to be green, the noise had thinned to a hum you could live beside. Reporters found newer storms. Our phones went back to being phones. What remained were the rooms, ours to arrange, and the promises we hadn't said out loud yet. We started with Sunday. Not the spectacle we used to stage, roasts and silver and the performance of a perfect family, but a table set for 2 with mismatched plates, the good napkins anyway, and a vase of rosemary I'd bullied back into tenderness. Michael arrived 10 minutes early, carrying bread he'd actually baked, an apology shaped like a crust. He kissed my cheek, held the kiss a beat longer than habit, and we ate the kind of meal that makes no headlines. Quiet, real, refill your water when you see it's low love. After coffee, he pulled out a folder the color of wet slate. Board wants me to take the COO role, he said. Not puffed up, just sober. I told them yes, with limits. No hero hours, no Asia saves the quarter gambits. I'll be home for supper 3 nights a week. If I break that, you have permission to call me out in front of the entire exec team. Public accountability, I said, smiling into my mug. Your father would call that excellent governance. I call it a fence I build before I wander. He met my eyes and didn't look away. I loved Olivia. I also abandoned her to empty evenings and the myth that money was a conversation. Both things can be true. He exhaled. I'm not asking you to absolve her. I'm asking you to help me not repeat the part that was mine. Deal, I said. We shook hands like partners and laughed like family, which is the best contract I know. On Tuesday, I went back to the headquarters I'd avoided since funerals taught me how floors echo when you walk alone. The lobby still smelled like polished ambition. The receptionist still knew my name. In the boardroom, the windows made a sermon out of the harbor, and I opened the meeting the way Richard used to, standing, not perched, hands unhidden, voice plain. We are not the scandal you read, I said. We are the choices we make now. Then we made them. Drake briefed the risk committee until the word offshore sounded like a tired song from a summer you don't miss. Our council sketched the guardrails we should have had and the ones we now do. Finance presented a liquidity plan so dull I wanted to send it a thank you note. I signed resolutions, declined a fawning interview, and authorized a scholarship fund in Richard's name for kids who can outwork luck. It felt like tightening a ship's rigging before weather. Not fear, respect. The next morning I kept a different appointment. Cypress Hills Cemetery was all clean lines and New England restraint, names with more years after them than most buildings. I brought Richard a thermos cap of Cabernet and the letter I'd written in the Cape bedroom the day we found his goodbye. I read it out loud because I believe in witnesses. You were right about shadows, I told the marble that didn't need telling. You were wrong about me needing protection from the whole truth. I can carry it. I'm carrying it now. I left the wine for the ground and the letter for my pocket. On the walk back, I passed a stone with a name that was and wasn't ours. I stopped. I don't forgive you. I said to the heir that used to be Lawrence, but I will not build a house where hatred pays the mortgage. Then I kept walking. Sometimes mercy is just refusing to host a ghost. When the sentencing came, the courtroom felt smaller than the story. Olivia wore county beige like it didn't fit. The judge wore gravity like a well-tailored suit. She took her punishment with a kind of steadiness I hadn't seen in her. First brick in a road that is hers, not mine, to walk. On the way out, she turned just enough for our eyes to meet. I gave her the smallest nod I own. It wasn't approval, it was acknowledgement. You did this, and you are doing this. Both. That night, the city reigned the way Boston apologizes. Sincere, sideways. I made soup that knew its own job, and called Eleanor, who skipped hello and went straight to, "Are we planting hydrangeas Saturday, or are we planting hydrangeas Saturday?" "Saturday," I said. "Blue like the kind that misbehave and you love them anyway." We dug holes under a sky too honest to pretend it was summer, laughing at the way wet soil ruins good shoes. When we were done, I pressed my palm to the new root ball the way you test a child's forehead for fever. "You're home," I told it. "Grow messy." Weeks accumulated like folded linens. The scholarship launched. The first thank you note arrived from a girl in Dorchester who had a voice like a work bell. The board adjusted to Michael's fences and found they liked not bleeding. Morelli sent a text with 3 words, "Case, closed, proud," that landed like a hand on the back between the shoulders. "Steady there." Drake, with nothing left to harden, took his wife to Maine. I hope he let himself be off duty. And in the ordinary that followed, the brave ordinary I'd chosen, I found room for something I had not expected to plant. On a calm Thursday, I drove to the Cape alone. No mission, no search, just a key and a house that knows the pitch of my footsteps. I opened windows and watched the curtains learn the wind's name again. In the study, I took down the harbor painting and, for the first time, didn't open the safe behind it. I put the painting back, set a single shell on the frame, and sat at the old desk with a blank page. I wrote the thing I wish Susie from 7 years ago had found on her nightstand the morning after the worst day. Grief is a contractor. If you hire it, it will build you a bunker or a porch. Both keep you out of the rain. Only one lets neighbors wave. I left the page on the blotter where sun could eavesdrop. Then I walked the beach until my shins argued and my heart said thank you. The Atlantic kept doing what oceans do, arriving, retreating, returning. Forgiving nothing, forgetting nothing, washing everything anyway. When I came back, the house smelled like its old summer self. Salt, cedar, a rumor of lemons. I poured 1 glass of Cabernet, set another on the sill the way I always will, and called Michael. "How's the edge of the world?" he asked. "Level," I said, and meant it. "Come down this weekend, bring the bread. 3 nights home, like we said," he replied. Sunday included. We hung up without ceremony. I carried my glass to the porch and listened to the kind of quiet that isn't empty. In the distance, a bell buoy did its patient, necessary work. I raised the glass toward the horizon that had carried us this far and would carry us farther, and I made a final, simple promise, the kind you can build a life on. More truth. Less theater. Love that clocks in. Awesome. Here are the 4 concluding beats, ideas 7 to 10, in the same cinematic voiceover style you've been using. By morning, the city was awake, and so was the story. Squad cars idled outside the harbor view while detectives walked out with evidence boxes, their labels a grim inventory of forged affidavits and altered medical forms. Reporters swarmed the sidewalk like gulls before a storm. I said nothing. The only sound I allowed myself was the click of my heels on wet pavement and the quiet private prayer every widow knows, let truth be louder than rumor. At the station, statements became transcripts, transcripts became charges. Conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted grand larceny, identity misappropriation. Page asked for water, Lawrence asked for a lawyer. I asked for a chair near the window, where the rain turned Boston into a watercolor. I didn't feel victorious, I felt finished. Like a door I'd been holding shut finally latched on its own. But endings are never neat. They bleed into everything that matters. Especially when family is the headline. He landed just past midnight, the flight from Hong Kong turning him the color of old paper. We stood in the kitchen where he'd done school projects and burned toast and grown into a man. He didn't touch the coffee I poured. He just stared at his ring, turning it like a small, stubborn lock. She chose him, he said, voice hoarse, and she chose him because he looked like Dad. There are moments that demand the truth, and there are moments that demand mercy. I gave him both. I told him everything, how I found the messages, how I watched them at La Mayon, how I wired the house, how I set the table and smiled while the world tilted. He listened with his jaw clenched and his eyes wet, the way men cry when there's no time left to rehearse being strong. She didn't fall, he said at last. She jumped. I reached across the island and took his hand. Then we build a bridge on our side, I said. And we don't follow. Truth arrived in folders thick as hymnals. The investigator laid them out in Timothy's study, birth certificates that smelled like attics, agency letters typed on paper thin as onion skin, photographs where the light did most of the forgiving. The revelation was not a twist so much as a correction. Timothy had been a Mitchell twice, by love first and by blood all along. His biological father was a Mitchell brother. The adoption's a careful choreography to rescue reputations and raise children without detonating the family name. Triplets separated not by fate, but by adults who believed secrecy was salvation. Thomas, gone at 22. Lawrence, raised in a cold house that taught him the cost of wanting, and Timothy, my Timothy, raised by people who chose him before they ever knew he was theirs. I read his unfinished note again, his warning about Lawrence, his choice to wait, to protect me from a truth that felt like a blade made of paper. Love had made him cautious, loss had made him silent, now knowledge made us safe. The law did what it could. Page took a plea, years measured not just in sentences, but in apologies that never reached the mark they were meant for. Lawrence, defiant to the end, chose a darkness the courts could not litigate. The newspapers moved on, the vans left the driveway, and Boston remembered other scandals. We did something quieter. Mark filed the papers, then boxed the photographs and kept only one. The one where Page's smile was honest and the future still had good manners. We visited 3 graves. Thomas for the brother we never knew, Elizabeth for the girl who ran out of options, and Timothy for the man who kept choosing us, even when the truth was heavy. In the study that still holds the shape of his shoulders in leather, I locked the safe and changed the combination to a future date. The day Mark will one day tell his own child that legacies are not money or houses or names carved in hedges. Legacies are choices. Who you love, what you protect, when you speak. I poured 1 glass of his favorite Cabernet and stood by the window where the harbor keeps its secrets. Checkmate, I whispered again, but softer now, like a benediction. Not to the man who tried to steal our life, but to the life that refused to be stolen. And for the first time in 7 years, the house felt less like a museum and more like a home where the truth could live.